20 years ago, he believed he had atoned for his transgressions. Some claimed he was merely an elderly rancher caring for cattle close to the dry Montana plains. However, many who had previously heard of him recalled something different. A man who could kill someone from 200 yards away without blinking. A man who vanished the day he decided to give up killing. Elias Boone was his name. He lived in silence for 20 years. He constructed fences and raised horses. He never came into contact with a firearm. His wife used to make jokes about his trading Bible texts for bullets. However, the house fell silent once more after her passing last winter. Cold coffee, empty dishes, and the sound of unanswered prayers. His daughter was the only thing that kept him alive. Clara was her name. She had wed a shopkeeper in Red Hollow, a sleepy village 3 days away from his ranch. She wrote about rain, how she missed his biscuits, and how she wanted he would come before the snow arrived in her final letter. So he packed a tiny bag, saddled his old horse, and headed east. Old spirits can be awakened by spending 3 days by themselves in the desert. He went by the arid riverbeds where he used to bury people for cash. He passed the burned-out tavern where he had previously shot a sheriff who had drawn first but was not quick enough. The identical question was whispered every mile. Did the past simply go to sleep until something roused it up again, or could a man truly change? When he stopped to water his horse at the river bend, where the sky had become the color of rust, he saw a form close to the tree. A woman slumped against the trunk, partially clothed in mud, her clothes ripped and ragged, her bare feet wounded and bleeding. He believed she had passed away. Then she raised her gaze. Her face was hollow despite her youth. Her eyes are ash-colored. She attempted to stand, faltered, and fell once more. He moved closer, habitually keeping his hand close to his hip. Gasping in between tears, the woman recoiled. She said, "I can't hold it in anymore. Just hurry it up." He froze for a moment. The way she spoke, the way her shoulders shook like if she had already reconciled with D. It struck him more forcefully than a bullet could. He dropped to his knees, removed his coat, and put it around her shoulders. Her skin was freezing. "Who did this to you?" he said after giving her some water. She simply gazed at the river without responding. Elias examined her wrist, which had the kind of rope burns that come from being dragged. There was a stirring deep within him, the identical thing that used to awaken prior to each task and each trigger pull. However, it wasn't for financial gain this time. It was something darker and older. Elias Boone felt the past begin to breathe once again as darkness fell and the river darkened. One question consumed his thoughts as he observed the shattered woman trembling in the moonlight. What if he had to turn into the murderer he had buried 20 years prior in order to save her? Beside the river, the fire crackled. The woman's face twitched every few seconds while Elias watched her sleep, like if she were battling spirits in her nightmares. Her hands were burned, her breathing was shallow, and her garments were ripped and frayed. She didn't give him her name, and he didn't know it either. Despite the fact that she appeared to be around 30, if not younger, he simply referred to her as Kid. The fog gradually lifted as daylight arrived. When she opened her eyes and realized that he was still there, she winced. Cowboy romance tales. He gave her a strong, bitter cup of coffee. "Why didn't you kill me last night?" she whispered as she accepted it with trembling hands. Like a man who had witnessed too much death to ever wish it on anyone again, he gazed at her with weary kindness. He gazed at the steam that was rising between them. "I'm done with killing." She stared at him for a long moment, her lips quivering as if she wanted to laugh but was unable to. "Nobody's ever really done with it," she muttered. She then turned aside and embraced the coat he had given her. They traveled silently after Elias assisted her in mounting his horse. The country was vast and barren. A sky too vast for one man's thoughts, scorched fences and dry grass. He continued to look at her image in the saddle mirror. Like someone who had witnessed too much and was waiting for it to happen again, her eyes were attentive but hollow. They arrived at Red Hollow's edge by the afternoon. He recalled the laughter that used to reverberate from the fields and the scent of fresh bread from his daughter's porch. However, the wind was carrying something different now. A stench he was all too familiar with. Smoke and iron. His daughter's door was ajar. They tore down the drapes. Broken plates on the ground. He called her name as he entered. There was no response, just a choking quiet. Then he noticed the body, his son-in-law's skull broken and face down near the table. The weight of 20 years of Western storytelling crashed back into Elias's chest as he fell to one knee. The female. She covered her lips and gasped behind him. She examined the wounds before turning to face Elias. Her eyes were wide with something between fear and shame. "That's them," she said. Whispered. "The proprietors of the establishment I ran from." Elias turned to her slowly. "You're identifying the men who carried out this. Are you from that house?" she asked, nodding. "And they've had your daughter for a while." Time. He didn't move. He simply gazed at the ground, his mouth clenched, his breath. The sound of an aged heart breaking slowly. Once more. The woman attempted to talk, but he held up his hand for quiet. He got up, went to the corner and picked up a loose but there was a wrapped gift underneath. Of greasy fabric that included his vintage rifle, the same weapon that previously made him a household name over 3 states. After cleaning the barrel of dust, he peered out the window at the lowering sun. Then, in a calm, low voice, he said, "Tell me where they took her." The calm, elderly rancher who everyone had forgotten had vanished in one instant. The moon rose slowly that night, but what came out that door was something else entirely. The Wild West Stories podcast. Nora and Elias continued to ride until the path became narrow and dark. The scent of wood smoke and whiskey was wafted by the breeze. From a distance, he could hear the shrill, nasty laughing of guys who had never experienced consequences. Nora gestured to a queue of shacks close to the town's outskirts. "That's it," she muttered. "There, the girls are housed. The individual in charge of it owns the large mansion in the center." Elias examined the guards, the lights, and the dogs that were restrained close to the barrier. He was reminded of another life by every sound, the chilly breath before drawing the trigger, the nights he pursued men for cash. He whispered softly while crouching behind a fallen log. "How many guards do you remember?" "Maybe 7, she replied. 3 close to the stable, 2 beside the gate. He nodded like a man counting fence posts to the others within. Just calculation, no rage. They waited until the music in the saloon became loud enough to drown out their footsteps. Elias took the lead, moving as slowly as a shadow. Before the first guard could turn, his knife caught his throat. The second suffered a fractured neck. However, the exertion caused Elias's shoulder to scream in agony. He leaned his back against the wall and breathed heavily, his perspiration blending with the dust. 20 years of not fighting had left its impact. Despite her breathing difficulties, Nora continued to follow him. They took refuge behind the stable, where lanterns gently swayed in the breeze. The horses were restless and disturbed. Elias soothed one by patting it on the neck. Then he noticed that something was nailed to the post. A woman's ribbon, familiar but filthy. He was able to identify the stitching. It belonged to Clara. He remained silent. He was not required to. They crept into the house's side hallway. Nora muttered, "The girls' rooms are located in the rear." He gave a nod. The stench of perfume, alcohol, and perspiration filled the hallway. Up ahead, voices floated from a room. While playing cards, 3 men watching Wild West romance films scraped the walls with their laughing. Elias steadied his breath, raised his weapon, and fired twice. When Nora emerged from the shadows and pointed her revolver directly at the third man, he paused as he reached for his gun. Her aim remained steady despite her fingers trembling. "The girl you brought in last week, where is she now?" She uttered those words. He muttered and spat blood. Elias didn't hold off. After striking the man hard enough to knock him out cold, he turned to face Nora. "We take her and head off." They crept up the wooden stairs, each step creaking beneath their boots while you stayed close. The slightest cry sounded from behind a shut door. The voice of Claire. Elias gripped the weapon more tightly. The smell of sweat, cheap perfume, and smoking filled the hallway. When no one was around, the lanterns flashed along the walls, creating long shadows that appeared to move. Nora trailed behind him, her little handgun trembling in her hands as her breath caught. A woman sobbed softly, afraid, and shattered somewhere upstairs. Elias cocked his head a little. He said, "Stay here," but Nora shook her head in a harsh voice. "Never again. I refuse to wait while someone else does." Together, they ascended the steps slowly and steadily. Under their boots, every board moaned that a piano played two sour notes somewhere below, and then it stopped. There was nobody in the first room. The second had a bed with blood on the pillow and ripped covers. Next, a third door appeared that was locked from the outside. Elias put his ear up against it. That's when he heard it. A faint yet recognizable voice. He didn't think twice. The lock was blasted open by a single shot. The door opened as the wood splintered there. Clara sat on the ground with her wrists bound and tears and grime all over her face. She gasped as if her lungs were remembering air for the first time as she saw him. Elias lowered his weapon, drew her in close, and used his knife to cut the cords. She sobbed as she clutched to him. "They claimed you would never show up. You forgot me," they said. He cleared her face of the hair. "I never forgot," he murmured. "Not one day, and I never will." However, the sound of a gun being cocked broke the silence before the situation could be resolved. In the doorway stood a towering man. His smile was rotten and wide, and his clothing was made of rich red velvet. "Well now," the man remarked. "Ain't this touching?" Elias stood motionless as a stone. "You took my daughter." The man chuckled. "You killed my business." Elias did not flinch when he raised his weapon. The silence was broken by two gunfire. One struck the wall, while the other struck the man directly in the chest. His lips dropped open and his eyes widened in shock. From the hallway, another guard charged in. Nora pulled the trigger despite her hands trembling fiercely on the gun. His shoulder was grazed by the wayward shot. Cursing, the man stumbled. Elias whirled around and shot him once in the chest. Startled that the rifle had actually fired, Nora gazed at her shaking hands. Elias looked back at her, his words calm yet harsh. "You performed well. You continue to breathe. That's what counts." The lantern fell to the floor. Oil quickly spilt. The curtains were caught around it. Next, the carpet. Then everything. Clara let out a scream. "It's on fire." Elias took hold of her arm. "We're heading out." However, as they dashed past the back rooms, he noticed two more girls, their faces illuminated by fire, locked inside and hammering on the doors. His knees buckled somewhat as he kicked the locks open. Coughing violently and with a blackened face from smoke, Nora dashed in next to him and pulled one female out. As the flames erupted behind them, another staggered behind them and reached for Elias's hand. He pulled her close and steadied her against his side. "Keep moving," he yelled. "Don't look back." With the heat pursuing them step by step and smoke piercing their lungs, they hurried down the hallway. The crisp air outside seemed like a ray of hope. The house behind them blazed till the walls broke and collapsed. They were silent for a considerable amount of time. The night sky was illuminated by the fire. Then the sound of hooves reached their ears. 6 riders are rapidly approaching from the ridge. With his jaw clenched and his eyes narrowing in the darkness, Elias raised his weapon. He remained silent. Every man who has ever attempted to escape his history understands what that sound signifies, so he didn't need to. For the first time, he didn't care if they survived the next battle. He had already discovered what was important. Morning arrived quietly and slowly. The smoke continued to hover over the dark remains of the former home in the valley. All night long, the fire had burnt. All that was left was stillness and ashes. Elias stood close to the fence, the rifle dangling at his side, his hands burnt, and his coat tattered. Clara sat next to him, covered by a blanket, her eyes red yet vibrant. Leaning against a tree, Nora assisted the other girls who had managed to escape. The scent of damp dirt and ancient grief was conveyed by the chilly morning wind. Nobody said anything for a long time. The silence was finally broken by Clara. "Daddy," she muttered, "how did you come across me?" His weary eyes softened as he gazed at her. "I didn't," he muttered. "The discovery must have been made by the Lord. I simply did what hurt." Nora gave a small smile. "You saved us," she declared. Elias gave a headshake. No, I just stopped running from what I should have faced a long time ago. He looked up at the rising sun. The river glowed red as the light struck it, like clean blood. He sensed the old ghosts becoming quieter somewhere deep inside. His hands stopped trembling for the first time in 20 years. Whispering gratitude, the females gathered close to the fire. What should they do now? One of them inquired. You start over, Elias stated after poking the ashes with a stick. Go locate a town that will accept you. You lead a tidy life. And you turn away when you see a man like me approaching. With tears still streaming down their faces, they chuckled gently. He glanced at Nora before focusing on her. The same woman who had pleaded with him to take her own life was now assisting others in surviving. That had a lovely, restorative quality. You're not the man they told stories about anymore, she remarked, meeting his gaze. He nodded slowly. Perhaps so, but a man's history never goes away. It simply watches to see what kind of man he will become in the future. The ashes were carried over the field like snow by the increasing wind. Elias took a deep breath and closed his eyes. For the first time, he was not afraid of the road ahead even though he had no idea where they were going. Perhaps it is the true meaning of redemption. Not to forget. Not pardoned. Just regaining the ability to stroll without disguising your identity. So allow me to ask you a question. Would you have the guts to confront your past if it knocked on your door, or would you continue to act as though it never happened? Sometimes picking up the pieces and starting anew is the hardest thing a guy can do. But occasionally, that's precisely what keeps him alive. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if this tale resonated with you. Pour yourself a hot cup of tea, take a seat, and tell me what time it is where you are and from where in the world you are listening.